Hello, Punta Cana, and thank you for having me. The Circle, Annie Lennox's non-profit organisation which globally support women and girls, state that over 603 million women live in countries where domestic violence is not considered a crime. Less than 40% of women who experience violence seek help. In India, a woman reports a rape every 15 minutes. In Russia, 1 in 5 women have experienced physical violence at the hands of their husbands. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, a report estimated that over 1,000 women were raped every single day, a rate equal to 48 per hour. Statistically, the vast majority of sexually violent acts are perpetrated by men. UN Women state that globally, an estimated 736 million women, almost 1 in 3, have been subjected to sexual violence at least once in their life. I am here with you today because we are saying enough. In lockdown, we have watched the steady rise in sexual violence figures across the world. It is a shadow pandemic. For every 3 months of lockdown, 15 million more women suffered domestic abuse. The pandemic has trapped women and children at home with their abusers and has simultaneously resulted in what Eve Ensler terms disaster patriarchy. Disaster patriarchy takes advantage of catastrophe, climate, war, pandemic to reassert itself, to put women and girls back into the home, out of their jobs, out of their schools. Annie Lennox, in her address to the G7 summit this year, stated that feminism has been set back an entire generation. We have watched this happen, sitting at home, locked down. And in this place of isolation for many of us, I would argue that the normalisation of male violence has not looked quite so normal. During lockdown in the UK, women witnessed the murder of Sarah Everard by a policeman, the murder of teacher Sabina Nessa, the murders of 2 sisters, Beba Henry and Nicole Smallman, stabbed to death in a London park, subsequent to which 2 Metropolitan Police officers took pictures of their bodies and circulated the pictures on WhatsApp. In November, the BBC reported the story of a hospital worker who admitted to sexually abusing at least 100 female corpses, including children. How is it possible that even in death, as a woman, you cannot be safe? Your body cannot be safe. Male violence is nothing new. However, the female outrage, the vigils, the marches in response over the last 18 months have been more prevalent. And while governments busy themselves with legislations to make women feel safer, apps and helplines, feminists and NGOs argue this is not the answer. The only answer is we have to campaign for the end of male violence. We have to ask for it every single day of our lives. We have to insist on it. There is no other way forward. You need a what now? There it is. Ask for the end of male violence every day. Why am I saying this? Because like most women I know, I've lived in fear my entire life. Of the man who was going to break into my home and kill me in the middle of the night. It was never a woman who was going to do that. Or the man who was going to grab me on the way home and push me into a van and rape and kill me. It was never a woman who was going to do that. Or of the date who was going to turn nasty and not hear me say no and force me to have sex. And a woman has never done that to me, but men have. It started for me when an elderly gentleman pulled me away from my mother and his wife and kissed me. I was 8 and he was 78. A friend said to me recently, the moment a man's hand goes into the underwear of a child, it's all over for them forever. And in a way it is. In that moment, as a small child, you are sexualized. Your childhood is over. It has taken me over 30 years to begin to deal with this. I blacked it out. I had no memory of it. But in my late 30s, I was approached by director Amy Berg to research and write a documentary about child abuse in Hollywood. I spent a year in this space, during which my own abuse began to come back to me. And when the film was released, no one wanted to see it. It was before abuse became zeitgeist. Yet the material had kicked up my past, and I couldn't avoid it. I became determined to find a way of writing about child abuse that people would see, that might help survivors. I started looking at drama, dark comedy. Could humour help an audience accept the material? My personal what now really started when I sat down to write everything I ever wanted to tell my daughter about men. A play written for my daughter, then in her teens. She was about to get involved in her own relationships, and I wanted to gift her my mistakes. I wanted to tell her all of them. So I sat down and I wrote a play for my daughter, a black comedy. Not a memoir, not the facts. I don't know why it crystallized in this way, but I sat and I tried to encapsulate the crisis point of every major relationship I'd ever had, to fit it into a 3-page scene, to dramatize it, to somehow reduce it to its essence and to universalize it, to write about alcoholism, abortion, date rape, looking after other women's children, falling in love with inappropriate men. And then I gave it to her with a bow on it. No, I didn't. Once I'd written the play, I found I had to debate what to do with it. I understood my primary motive was to tell my daughter the things my mother hadn't told me, but I paused. Because in the process of writing, I'd realised some things about myself. I'd realised for the first time that I'd chosen the same man all my life. He just looked different. He just sounded different. And I realised my ability to accept poor treatment from men all came down to the first man I'd ever kissed, that 78-year-old. And the fact I'd been his dirty little secret, and revulsed by him and blaming of myself. These factors had informed the choices I'd made in partners ever since him. My child abuse had informed my subsequent relationships. It was far too much to give a 16-year-old, so I gave it to my therapist instead. 2 years later, and the play is serving a purpose. It has been performed at the Wallis-Annenberg in Los Angeles and at Shakespeare's Globe in London as a fundraiser for sexual violence awareness charities. And these evenings have shown me that theatre can create a safe space for survivors. It can raise money and awareness and encourage women to share their stories. It has given me faith that we can use art to shine a light into the darkest places and to make a difference in the survivor space. I wanted to go around the world with the play and use it to start conversations. But a week after the Globe event, the pandemic shut the world down. And that was the end of that. But it wasn't. At the same time as doing the play, we had begun to shoot scenes from the play as short films. I'd had the idea of shooting every scene with a different female director. As a non-profit short film project, I had no idea whether it was going to work. We asked everyone to do it for nothing. 23 short films, 21 female directors. Can I stress this was all unplanned? It was just an idea that snowballed. And had I known this would take 3 years and real blood, sweat and many tears and be a Sisyphean task above anything I'd ever done before, no money, one which would leave me severely in debt and working with a team of 300 people, all of whom it wouldn't have happened without, and most of whom I managed to piss off really badly at some point, I would have done it anyway. Because what was truly incredible about this project was that on every shoot day, men and women came forward and thanked us for supporting survivors because they were a survivor. It became clear to me how many people are survivors of abuse and how much it means to know that you're not alone. And can I reiterate that here and now today? You are in a room full of survivors. You are not alone. You need to remind yourself of that every day. So with this fuel, I determined to finish the films, and then I decided, God help me, that we would edit all the short films into one feature film. And this is what I did during the pandemic. This was my plan B. We couldn't tell the story in theatres, but we could get it into the world as a film. In order to connect the short films, I had to tell the one part of the story I had left out, the really difficult part, and that was my own survivor's story. I hadn't been honest about that. I have suffered from crippling panic attacks and depression since I was 16. I have been on antidepressants for the last 25 years. I have had moments in theatres and cinemas where I have stopped breathing and lost all sensation in my arms and legs. I have night terrors where I wake up thinking I'm dying, not knowing where I am or who I'm with. I have always felt like damaged goods, not good enough. The story I needed to tell for the film to be of use to survivors was how much help I'd needed to survive. Working with my therapist also helped me to bury my abuser. He was dead, but not dead to me, and to visualise safe spaces to be in when I needed them. And this is because the fear and panic don't go away. They never go away. They are there every day. But you can learn how to deal with feeling them. You can learn how to help yourself feel safe. And in this safer place, I did remember some of what had happened to me, and I talked about it. And this process, these sessions, are what I wrote to thread the 23 films together. The therapy I needed to integrate my experiences and to move forwards with my life. And being honest about this enabled me to finish the film. It was a level of vulnerable I wasn't really prepared for, and which to this day makes it hard for me to see the film at all. But I didn't make it for me. I made it for other survivors. So let me go back for a moment to where we are now, here in this room. The 603 million women who live in countries where domestic violence is not considered a crime. The 736 million women who have experienced sexual violence. We, afraid to walk home alone at night, afraid to walk in the park at the weekend, knowing our policemen may not keep us safe, knowing our men cannot keep us safe from other men. Feminism set back an entire generation. The pandemic has to be a catalyst for change and action. And the advice I can give as a result of my own experience can only be break your silence, talk to and be honest with your children. When I finally plucked up the courage to show my daughter the film, fully expecting her to curl up and die with embarrassment, she didn't. She reacted with tremendous grace. She and her friends engaged with it. We talked about it. We continue to do so. She has subsequently come up to me to ask for help when 2 of her university girlfriends were assaulted in the same week. She was aware they needed support, helplines, not to be left alone. She asked for help for them. It is early days for the film. We were nominated for Best Narrative Feature at the Austin Film Festival, and women around the world watched the virtual screenings and have written to me about recognising their own experiences. Because of their reactions, I do feel the film can serve its purpose and be a roadmap for survivors. For those of you here, there are many ways I can recommend you do this. I say join online forums, join movements, join online groups, find your local support organisation, and if there isn't one, form your own support group. Do it now, after this talk. I say write down your story in whichever way you choose. Give your pain and fear a voice. I say this can be done anonymously, be safe, but do not be silenced. To survivors here today, I encourage you to seek therapy and support if you haven't. Attached to this talk will be UN and local helplines for anyone needing help. And there are now global voluntary EMDR online organisations that support survivors of sexual violence. I'm not saying this is easy. From my experience, I know that the people around you may not necessarily be able to support you or hear you. Men will try to silence you. Your parents may not be able to process their guilt. Your friends, your lovers may not be able to receive the information. But you have to raise your head above all this noise and say it anyway. On this journey, 2 women's theories offering a solution to male violence have stayed with me. And to conclude, I would like to share them with you. Every year, Jess Phillips, the UK Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence, stands up in the Houses of Parliament and reads out the names of all the women killed by male violence in the UK that year. In 2020, it was 207. She has stated that equality is not possible until women receive equal pay across every industry and until they are paid for caregiving, motherhood being financially rewarded as work. She states that until this happens, men will never treat women as equals. The second breakthrough for me was finding Andrea Dworkin's address to 500 men at the National Organisation for Changing Men in 1983. There she asked the men in the audience for a 24-hour rape truce. Dworkin, identifying the existence of rape in and of itself as making freedom from fear for women impossible. I think we should resurrect this idea in her honour and petition globally for a rape-free world, and petition for it every day. You can sign the petition on our website, telleverything.org. Andrea Dworkin in this speech also identified the silent scream. She said, "What I would like to do is to scream, and in that scream I would have the screams of the raped and the sobs of the battered, and even worse, in the centre of that scream, I would have the deafening sound of women's silence, that silence into which we are born because we are women, and which most of us die." My mother's generation lived in a culture where abuse didn't exist, where sexual violence was fully normalised. My generation has to take a step forwards. We have to share our stories to show that none of this is normal or acceptable. It is not acceptable to live in fear. We need to do this so our daughter's generation can evolve and take one step further than us. They need to know that changes have to be made globally, that they cannot be silent about male violence anymore, that every day they need to scream out loud and they have to shout because their very lives may depend upon it.